There's a lot of things going on today that really put a spotlight on data exposure, data sharing. You know, I always talk about there are these challenges out there that really cross organizational boundaries. They cross different levels of government. If you look at things like healthcare, if you look at things like energy and the environment, if you look at things like financial reporting out there, these are things that cross the boundaries of your typical stereotypical sort of government agency, and quite frankly across levels of government, whether it's, you know, local, state, city, or the federal government. So the challenges that we have today really cross all of those things, which means data sharing is really, really important for the government to make better decisions, to be, you know, effective leaders and things like that. The other things that are going on is that, you know, there's the current administration's really the push for openness, transparent data. So that's just another sort of driver that says, let's get this information out. So there's all these pressures that say, there's unique challenges today. There's sort of the political pressures of putting data out that are sort of driving towards really good, effective data sharing. I think we can put up data pretty quickly these days, especially with technology. It's really understanding how the data is going to be used in the context of that data that's really going to take us back a little bit in terms of our data collection practices and quality procedures. There's this concept, you know, that I believe that we can actually use data much more effectively in government. And so it was my challenge that said, let's, you know, architect for sharing. Let us make sure that we collect once, share many, and not just share amongst ourselves, but share with the people who share our mission. To me, I think governance is really a key aspect of really good, effective data sharing, whether it's through trusted partners or whether it's through data sharing with the public as well. They need to have governance to say, if we're going to exchange data, we need to have an understanding of what the frequency is, what the quality of that data is, how it's being used. So there needs to be a governance to make sure that you just don't do it once, but it's in place to make sure that this is managed as really a strategic asset for all the different partners involved in the data exchange. And when you look at those kind of examples, that's a common occurrence through some of these networks within the trusted partner realm that's actually working really well. We've actually seen pretty good networks being built where there have been common problems, like on the environmental side, where it's not just the state environmental agencies who are dealing with you know, state environmental problems. They're really global problems. If you look at, you know, from a federal perspective, climate change. It's not a single federal US EPA thing. It's not a state thing. It's together we need to take a look at some of these things. That's why you're seeing those kind of groups form the National Environmental Information Exchange Network, where they're actually exchanging environmental data across the U.S. so we can look at environmental issues more globally, more nationally. When we were doing the National Environmental Information Exchange Network, which is originally developed to exchange data between state environmental agencies and the U.S. EPA, the federal government. So the original intent was to exchange data between states and the federal government. But what happened was, and this is what is really cool to me, is within the state environments, they said, you know what, we can use this same information sharing environment with other state agencies. So the state environmental agencies started sharing data with the state health agencies or state health departments. So I remember one of my favorite stories was early on when we were implementing the exchange network, which is what we called it, was the state of Washington, Department of Ecology came to me and said, gosh, we sat down with our, at the Washington State Department of Health, because the Department of Health was seeing an increase in birth defects in certain areas of the state. And we started talking to them and saying, well, you know, we're taking this fish tissue sampling out of certain surface water areas, and maybe there's a correlation. They want to see if there's a correlation. Well, we're already collecting the data, you know, from the State Department of Ecology standpoint. So why not just give those data elements and results to the Department of Health, and maybe they can see if there's a trend here to say, is there a trend based on, you know, mercury levels or levels that we're finding in the fish? And they were able to sit down for 2 weeks, talk about what the data is, implement the technology within a day, I believe, even at the time, which was really fast, and say, oh my gosh, all of a sudden we have seamless data exchange. Data collected in the field, immediately given to the Department of Ecology, immediately that same data without any touching, the same quality data going to the Department of Health for a different purpose. I saw another great example in Pennsylvania where there was 2 agencies actually collecting the same data from folks. So it was coming in two different ways. Well, with data sharing, it comes in once now, and it's shared between both agencies. Fantastic changes, changing sort of government business. You know, that's great for citizens, quite frankly. Where you're having these successful networks, whether it's through the National Environmental Information Exchange Network, you have a good governance where people are involved, or the National Information Exchange model, which is law enforcement information, justice-related information that's being exchanged now between, you know, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, and all the local and state levels for looking at law enforcement data. A lot of the same elements are there. We talk about they have a really good governance involved now. They have leadership commitment. They have tools to help with any partner who wants to exchange these data. They have an understanding of what the data, how the data is defined, so that they're not getting, when they're doing the data exchanges, they're not getting apples to oranges anymore. They're getting apples to apples, and that's really important to things like law enforcement. And ultimately, all of these data exchanges are making for better decisions, and which ultimately help citizens, and that's really what citizens care about, quite frankly. To me, as someone who is really interested in seeing how this stuff is moving, I guess it's not so scary to say, well, let's make data more available, let's be more open and transparent, because I'm seeing sort of what the benefits are that are out there, and how people are sort of taking advantage of things. And it's a pretty remarkable thing to see. It's not really scary, it's more exciting.